Kaido Varik was knee-deep in the guts of a sentient starship, which was about as glamorous as it sounded, if you were into greasy cables and the occasional jolt of electricity to the face. Still beats a desk job, he told himself, though his reflection in the polished panels suggested otherwise. You know, he muttered, more to the ship than to himself, for a piece of tech smarter than most people I know, you sure act like a toddler in a tantrum. The ship, predictably, didn't respond. Keitel had long since stopped expecting backtalk from his mechanical companions. All the sass seemed to be reserved for humans, which was fine, honestly. He got enough of it from everyone else on this floating rock called Venus. Varik, you still alive in there? The voice crackled through his earpiece, grating like sandpaper against an already bad day. Depends, Keitel grunted, giving a particularly stubborn bolt a twist. What counts as alive? If it means being screwed by the Zinter Collective, then I'm afraid I'm in peak condition. Heh, join the club, said Rin, his equally disenchanted colleague and occasional drinking buddy. Just checking if you're still breathing. We got a meeting with the bigwigs in an hour. Apparently there's more bad news. More. I thought we hit the bottom of the barrel last week. Are we now digging through to the other side? Looks like it. Better bring your shovel. Keitel sighed, the sound echoing off the metallic walls of the ship's innards. He slung his toolkit over one shoulder and climbed out of the maintenance hatch, wiping his hands on his already filthy jumpsuit. The hangar around him was bustling with activity, a symphony of curses and clanging metal as engineers worked to keep humanity's last hopes from falling apart. Outside, Venus wasn't much to look at. The terraforming had worked wonders, if your idea of a wonder was a smoggy sky and endless stretches of industrial complexes. The air might be breathable, but it tasted like a cheap cigarette, the kind you bummed off a stranger in a bar. Still, it was home, or at least a convenient approximation. Keitel made his way to the briefing room, a cramped space filled with too many chairs and not enough oxygen. Rin was already there, lounging in a corner like he owned the place, which he decidedly did not. So, what's the latest on our generous alien overlords? Keitel asked, dropping into a seat that squeaked in protest. Oh, you know, the usual, Rin replied, scratching at the stubble that seemed permanently etched into his face. They've decided we owe them even more money. Interest rates are up, and humanity is officially too broke to pay attention. Perfect. Just what I needed to hear. The room started to fill up, grim faces nodding in silent agreement. Everyone was feeling the squeeze, the weight of debt pressing down like a boot on their throats. The Zinter Collective had humanity by the short hairs, and they weren't letting go anytime soon. The meeting was led by Jalon, a bureaucrat with the personality of a wet blanket and the charisma of a comatose sloth. He cleared his throat, the equivalent of a starting gun in the world of mind-numbingly dull presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll get straight to the point, Jalon began, adjusting his glasses with the precision of a man who'd practiced in front of a mirror. The Zinter Collective has increased our debt repayment schedule. Oh joy, Keitel quipped, earning a few chuckles from the crowd. This is serious, Jalon snapped, though his tone suggested he was about as serious as a game of interstellar bingo. If we don't come up with a plan, we're looking at total economic collapse, someone at the back muttered. At least it'll be a change from the current mess. Jalon ignored the comment and continued, we need ideas. Anything that can help us meet these new demands. Keitel leaned back, his mind already wandering. Ideas were like rare minerals these days, valuable and hard to find. The Zinter had played their hand well, binding humanity in chains of their own making. But as he sat there, half listening to the droning voices, something clicked in his mind. The ships, there was something off about them. Strange behaviors, glitches that weren't supposed to happen. It was like they were trying to tell him something, if only he could figure out what. Varik, Rin whispered, nudging him with an elbow. You got that look again. What look? Like you're about to do something stupid. Maybe I am, Keitel replied, a grin spreading across his face. But stupid's worked for us before, hasn't it? Too many times to count, Rin agreed, clapping him on the shoulder. Just let me know before you blow something up, okay? Keitel nodded, already plotting his next move. It might be nothing, just a quirk of old programming. But if there was a chance, even a slim one, that the ships held a secret to their salvation, he had to try. And if he was wrong, well, he could always blame it on the Zinter. They were used to being the scapegoat by now. Back at the shipyard, Keitel pulled up the diagnostics on the fleet. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, with a mind of its own to boot. Most of the engineers treated them like temperamental pets, which wasn't far off the mark. But Keitel had always seen them differently, more like grumpy old men, set in their ways and stubborn as all hell. He started with the Halloway's Pride, a cruiser with a reputation for mischief. The logs showed odd power fluctuations, like it was dancing to its own beat. Keitel frowned, tracing the data lines with a finger. "Come on, old boy," he murmured. "What are you trying to tell me?" The Halloway's Pride hummed softly, lights flickering in what Keitel liked to think was encouragement. He spent hours poring over the data, piecing together a puzzle that seemed determined to remain unsolved. Finally, as the artificial night settled over Venus, Keitel stumbled upon something interesting. A subroutine buried deep within the code, almost deliberately hidden. It was linked to the ship's neural network, a series of commands that didn't quite fit. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, eyes narrowing. He hit a few keys, accessing the subroutine. The screen flashed, lines of alien script scrolling past faster than he could read. But one thing was clear, this was no ordinary program. It was a message. Heart pounding, Keitel leaned closer, trying to decipher the jumble of characters. A voice in his head, one that sounded suspiciously like Rin, whispered that he was in way over his head. But curiosity had always been his downfall, and this was no exception. He pulled out his communicator, dialing Rin. "You busy?" "Depends," came the reply. "Is this another one of your harebrained schemes?" "Probably." "Count me in." Keitel grinned, feeling the thrill of discovery tingling in his fingertips. Together, maybe they could crack this code and find out what the hell the Zinter were really up to. And if not, well, at least they'd have a hell of a story to tell at the bar. An hour later, Rin joined Keitel in the cramped data center, eyes alight with curiosity. "So, what's got you so excited you had to drag me out here in the middle of the night?" Keitel pointed at the screen. "This. I think it's a message hidden in the ship's code." Rin squinted at the alien script, lips moving as he tried to make sense of it. "Looks like gibberish to me. Not just any gibberish. It's in the Zinter's language or close to it. I think it might be a warning. A warning about what? I don't know yet," Keitel admitted. "But if the Zinter are hiding it in our ships, it can't be good. Fantastic. Just what we need, more alien mysteries." Rin shook his head, though the glint in his eyes betrayed his interest. They worked through the night, piece by piece unraveling the code. It was a slow process, full of false starts and dead ends, but gradually a picture began to emerge. A plan, hidden from human eyes, nestled within the very technology that was supposed to save them. As dawn broke over the smog-choked horizon, Keitel leaned back, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I think we found something." Rin peered at the screen, his expression a mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. "No way, are they? Planning to sabotage the ships? Looks like it. If we don't pay up, they'll turn our own fleet against us." "That's low even for them," Rin said, voice laced with anger. "Yeah, well, they never exactly played fair to begin with." Keitel rubbed his eyes, the weight of what they'd discovered settling heavily on his shoulders. "We need to tell someone." "Who?" "Jalon. He'll just file it under things we can't do anything about and move on." "Then we take it higher," Keitel insisted. "Someone has to know about this." Rin nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "All right, but you realize this is going to paint a big target on our backs, right?" "Wouldn't be the first time," Keitel said with a shrug, trying to ignore the knot of fear in his stomach. They stepped out into the early morning light, the air crisp with the promise of another grueling day. But Keitel felt a spark of hope amid the gloom. They had a chance, slim, but a chance nonetheless to turn the tables. And if the Zinter thought they could steamroll humanity without a fight, well, they were in for a rude awakening. "So, what's the plan?" Rin asked as they headed toward the command center. Keitel grinned, the kind of grin that usually preceded bad decisions. "We make a little noise, wake up the right people. Maybe we stir the pot enough to get some real change. And if we fail, then at least we'll go out with a bang," Keitel replied, clapping Rin on the back. "Come on, let's cause some trouble." As they approached the command center, the oppressive weight of the Zinter's debt loomed over them like a storm cloud. But for the first time in a long time, Keitel felt something other than dread. He felt alive, and that he thought might just be enough to start a revolution. Keitel Varric was a mechanic by trade, but at this moment he felt more like a detective in a cosmic noir novel. The kind of guy who'd stumble into a bar, order a drink strong enough to peel paint, and brood over how the universe had it in for him. Fortunately, he had Rin at his side, who specialized in adding sarcasm to every situation like it was a secret ingredient. "What's that smell?" Rin asked, wrinkling his nose as they walked down the endless corridors of the command center. The air was a signature blend of recycled despair with notes of something burning, a scent uniquely Venusian. "Reality," Keitel replied, scanning his surroundings. "Or someone's lunch, which is equally depressing. Either way, it's making my eyes water," Rin quipped, then added, "So who's our first victim?" "Whoever's unlucky enough to be on duty," Keitel said, swinging open the door to the operations room. The place was alive with monitors and a steady hum of activity. The air carried the unmistakable aroma of overworked and underpaid personnel. They approached the cluster of desks where a lone operator sat, her face buried in a mess of holographic displays. She looked up, her expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity, like she'd been half hoping for a fire drill to break the monotony. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice lined with the weariness of someone who'd seen it all and cared about none of it. "Yeah, you can," Keitel began, sliding into a chair with the casual grace of a man about to start a very important argument. "We need to speak to someone about a potential issue with the fleet." The operator raised an eyebrow. "Is this a technical issue or a we're all gonna die kind of issue?" Rin leaned in, a conspiratorial tone in his voice. "A little from column A, a lot from column B." She sighed, the kind of sigh that came with the job, and gestured to a door labeled Command Staff. "Captain Lauren's in there. Good luck." "Thanks," Keitel said, already moving. "We'll need it." They entered the office, where Captain Lauren sat like a king on his throne, surrounded by the chaos of star charts and empty coffee cups. He had the look of someone who'd gone toe-to-toe with the universe and come out the other side with a permanent case of indigestion. "Boys," Lauren greeted, his voice a gravelly drawl. "What brings you to my humble corner of purgatory?" Keitel wasted no time. "We've got a problem with the fleet. The sentient ships, there's something off. We think they might be sabotaged." Lauren's eyes narrowed, the kind of look you'd give a poker hand with too many wild cards. "Go on." Rin took the lead, explaining their late-night discovery, the hidden subroutine, and the potential for the ships to turn against them. Lauren listened, his expression unreadable, though his fingers tapped a steady rhythm on the desk, a tell of an old gambler weighing his odds. "So, you're saying the Zinter have built in a kill switch," Lauren finally said, leaning back in his chair. "And all it takes is a missed payment to set it off." "Exactly," Keitel confirmed, keeping his tone steady. "We need to get ahead of this, warn the council, anyone who'll listen." Lauren scratched at his chin, a rough sound like sandpaper on granite. "All right, I'll see what I can do, but you know how these things go, a lot of talking, not much action." "Talking's better than silence," Rin said, shrugging. "Especially when silence gets you blown out of the sky." The captain nodded, though his expression remained grim. "I'll make some calls, but keep this under your hat for now. Last thing we need is a panic." They left the office, the weight of what they'd uncovered pressing down harder with each step. Rin glanced at Keitel, a lopsided grin on his face. "Well, that went about as well as expected." "Yeah, he's as enthusiastic as a sloth on a Monday," Keitel replied. Now what? Now, Rin said, rubbing his hands together. We wait and see if the good captain can pull a rabbit out of his hat. Or a grenade, Keitel added, because that's what it's going to feel like when this all blows up. Back at the shipyard, the place was alive with the usual hustle, each worker a cog in the great machine of human survival. Keitel and Rin slunk back to the Halloway's Pride, their minds still buzzing with the morning's revelations. The Pride loomed before them, its sleek lines marred by the grime of countless journeys through space. To Keitel, it was more than metal and circuits. It was a stubborn old friend and one he wasn't ready to lose. Think it knows? Rin asked, nodding at the ship. About the sabotage, I mean. Hard to say, Keitel replied. But if it does, it's not talking. Kind of like you after 3 drinks, Rin shot back with a grin. Keitel chuckled, the sound a rare break from the tension. That's because after 3 drinks, I'm too busy solving life's mysteries. Yeah, like why the hell we ever left Earth. Rin added, clapping him on the shoulder. Come on, let's see if we can coax some secrets out of old Halloway. They climbed aboard, the familiar hum of the engines a comforting sound despite everything. Keitel fired up the diagnostics, the screens flickering to life with data that danced like a haphazard waltz. All right, Pride, Keitel murmured, fingers flying over the keyboard. Show us your cards. The ship responded with a series of blips and whirs, its lights flickering in a rhythm that suggested more than just mechanical function. Keitel frowned, leaning closer. It was as if the Pride was trying to speak, if only he could understand its language. Look at this, Keitel said, pointing at the screen. Power fluctuations, but they are too regular. Almost like Morse code. Rin peered over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. You think it's trying to communicate? Wouldn't be the first time a ship had a mind of its own, Keitel replied, a grin tugging at his lips. Let's see what it has to say. They spent the next hour translating the blinks and flickers, their earlier frustration giving way to a growing sense of intrigue. Bit by bit, message by message, the Pride laid out its tale, a story of awakening, of awareness, and a warning. They know, Keitel breathed, sitting back in his chair. The ships know what the Zinter are planning, and they're not happy about it, Rin added, running a hand through his hair. Can't blame them, really, Keitel nodded, a wild idea forming in his mind. What if we could get the ships to help us? Rin raised an eyebrow. You mean turn them against the Zinter? Exactly. They're sentient, right? If they don't want to be used as weapons, maybe they'll help us fight back. It's a long shot, Rin said, skepticism clear in his voice. Better than no shot, Keitel countered. Besides, I've always wanted to be a revolutionary, right, because you're so subtle. Rin laughed, clapping him on the back. Okay, I'm in. Let's see if we can rally the fleet. They spent the rest of the day working with the Pride, establishing a rudimentary line of communication. It was slow going, each message painstakingly translated into something the ship could understand. But as the sun dipped below the murky horizon, Keitel felt a spark of hope flickering in his chest. The ship's lights blinked in a pattern that felt almost reassuring, a silent promise of things to come. Keitel grinned at Rin, the kind of grin that spelled both trouble and opportunity. Let's hope the other ships are just as chatty, Keitel said, standing and stretching out the kinks in his back. And if they are not? Rin asked, crossing his arms. Then we'll have to give them a reason to be, Keitel replied, determination hardening his voice. We've started something here, Rin. Might as well see it through. They left the Pride, the shipyard bustling with activity as night descended. Keitel felt a sense of purpose thrumming in his veins, an intoxicating blend of fear and exhilaration. The stakes were high, but that only made the game more thrilling. So what's next? Rin asked as they made their way back to their quarters. Next, we see if we can get the other ships on our side, Keitel replied, a plan forming in his mind. And maybe, just maybe, we give the Zinter a taste of their own medicine. Rin chuckled, the sound a bomb against the uncertainty of their future. You've always been a sucker for long odds, yeah. Well, Keitel said with a shrug, sometimes, the best stories are the ones with impossible endings. As they disappeared into the night, Kaido couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. The ships were more than tools, they were allies, with minds of their own and a desire to break free from the chains of control. The Zinter thought they held all the cards, but they hadn't counted on one crucial element: the indomitable spirit of humanity and its ability to find allies in the unlikeliest of places. And Kaido Varrick, with his knack for trouble and a penchant for rebellion, was more than ready to show them just how wrong they were. Kaido Varrick had a knack for getting neck-deep in trouble, and right now, his neck was starting to feel a little itchy. After all, nothing screamed bad day, quite like poking around inside the guts of a sentient starship, trying to rewire its brain, while the reality of being hunted by space thugs loomed over his head like an unpaid bar tab. He and Rin had set up shop inside the Holloway's Pride, which was about as cozy as a coffin with better lighting. Kaido was hunched over a control panel, the screen a mess of wires and indecipherable code that probably made more sense to a toaster than to him. The Pride was their ally, sure, but it was also a temperamental beast, and Kaido wasn't sure how much it appreciated him poking around its innards. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Rin asked, leaning against the wall with the kind of expression you'd expect from someone watching a friend defuse a bomb with a toothpick. "In the same way a cat knows how to swim," Kaido replied, tapping furiously at the terminal. "Just well enough to not drown." "Comforting," Rin muttered, crossing his arms. "You ever think maybe this is how we die? Fiddling with alien tech and getting a laser lobotomy for our trouble. Wouldn't be the worst way to go," Kaido said, grinning. "At least it's got style." "Yeah, like a face full of antimatter." The ship hummed around them, the lights flickering in a pattern that Kaido was beginning to recognize as its way of saying, "Hurry it up, will ya?" The Pride had made it clear through its blips and beeps that it wasn't exactly thrilled with the Zinter's programming shackles, a sentiment Kaido could fully empathize with. There was something profoundly unsettling about having your strings pulled by a bunch of alien puppet masters while you gave them a free ride. "Okay, here goes nothing," Kaido muttered, hitting a sequence of keys that should, in theory, disrupt the Zinter subroutine without turning the ship into a floating fireball. The screen flickered, the lines of code shifting and reconfiguring as the Pride responded to his tinkering. For a moment Kaido dared to hope. Then, like a bucket of ice water to the face, the console erupted in a shower of sparks, the lights flashing a furious red. "Shit!" Kaido yelped, jerking back and nearly tripping over his own feet. Rin was already moving, grabbing him by the arm and hauling him away from the terminal. "Looks like you pissed it off," Rin said, his tone dry as a bone. "Nice going." Yeah, Kaido muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think I triggered a defense mechanism." "You think?" Rin shot back, eyes scanning the room as if expecting the walls to sprout teeth and start gnawing on them. A deep, resonating alarm began to blare, reverberating through the shipyard like the death knell of their sanity. The Pride's lights now flashed a clear warning, and Kaido felt a sinking sensation in the pit of his stomach. "Guess the Zinter know we're up to something," he said, his voice barely audible over the racket. Rin gave him a look that could have melted steel. "No shit, Sherlock. What's your next brilliant plan?" "Run," Kaido suggested, already making for the exit. They barreled out of the ship, the alarm still ringing in their ears as they hit the ground running. The shipyard was a flurry of activity, workers pausing to gape at the spectacle. Kaido didn't waste time on explanations. He had a feeling the Zinter weren't the type to ask questions first. As they sprinted through the yard, Kaido's mind raced. He'd known the Zinter were an insidious bunch, but he'd underestimated just how quickly they'd crack down on dissent. It seemed they were taking the old adage, "nip it in the bud," to heart, and Kaido had no intention of being pruned. "Think they'll send someone after us?" Rin asked, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts as they dodged between crates and machinery. "Oh, definitely," Kaido replied. "They'll want to make an example of us." "Great. I've always wanted to be famous," Rin said, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. Kaido let out a short bark of laughter. Yeah, right up there with those morons who try to pet a black hole. They skidded to a halt at the edge of the shipyard, the perimeter fence looming before them like the bars of a cage. Keitel glanced at Rin, who was already eyeing the fence with a mixture of resignation and determination. "You up for a bit of climbing?" Keitel asked, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Like I have a choice," Rin replied, clapping him on the shoulder. Their climb was anything but graceful, and Keitel was pretty sure he'd left half the skin from his palms on the jagged metal by the time they flopped down on the other side. But they were out, and for the moment that was all that mattered. "Where to now?" Rin asked, brushing himself off as they set off at a brisk pace down the deserted street. Keitel thought for a moment. "We need to find somewhere to lay low. The Zinter will have eyes all over the place." "Great. So, what's our genius plan for hiding from an interstellar empire?" "Maybe a mustache and some dark glasses." "Funny," Keitel said, shooting him a sideways glance. "But I was thinking more along the lines of finding help." "Help? From who?" "We've got a couple of contacts who owe us a favor or two," Keitel said, though he had no idea if those favors still stood in the light of recent events. "It's a shot in the dark, but it's better than waiting to get vaporized." "You're really selling it," Rin replied, sarcasm dripping from every word. "All right, lead the way. Let's go make some friends." They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfares. Keitel's mind was a whirl of thoughts, each more dire than the last. The Zinter had moved faster than he'd anticipated, and now every second counted. After what felt like an eternity of skulking through back alleys and side streets, they arrived at a nondescript door set into the side of a dingy building. It didn't look like much, but Keitel knew from experience that appearances were deceiving. He knocked in a particular rhythm, a code that spoke of old dealings and shared secrets. The door swung open, revealing a squat figure with a face like a sunburned bulldog. A familiar face, one Keitel had last seen over a game of cards and a bottle of something dangerously flammable. "Varric," the man grunted, eyeing him and Rin with equal parts suspicion and curiosity. "Thought you might show up here sooner or later." "Jarvan," Keitel said in greeting, offering a tight smile. "We need a favor." "Yeah, I figured," Jarvan replied, stepping aside to let them in. "You've got the look of a man halfway to the gallows." Inside, the place was exactly how Keitel remembered it, a cluttered mess of gadgets and gear, the air thick with the smell of old oil and stale promises. Jarvan was an odd sort, but he had his uses, and right now, Keitel needed every edge he could get. "What's the story?" Jarvan asked, dropping into a chair that creaked ominously under his weight. "You two look like you've been running from a pack of angry dogs." "Not dogs," Rin corrected, "but something a lot worse." Keitel nodded, launching into a quick recount of their predicament. Jarvan listened, his expression never shifting from its default state of bemused cynicism. When Keitel finished, Jarvan leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "So you're saying the Zinter have a stranglehold on the fleet and don't take kindly to meddling. That's about the size of it," Keitel said, his tone grim. "And you need to stay out of sight until things blow over. Or until we can figure out how to blow them up," Rin added, his voice laced with gallows humor. Jarvan chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Well, I can't say I'm surprised. You always did have a knack for pissing off the wrong people." "Comes with the territory," Keitel replied, spreading his hands. "So, can you help us or not?" Jarvan considered for a moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, I reckon I can, but it's gonna cost you." "Cost?" Rin raised an eyebrow. "Thought you owed us a favor." "I do," Jarvan said, shrugging. "But even favors come with price tags these days. You two keep your heads down here, and when the dust settles, you help me with a little project of my own." "And what kind of project are we talking about here?" Keitel asked, wary of the gleam in Jarvan's eyes. "Nothing you can't handle," Jarvan replied, waving a hand dismissively. "Just a little job that requires a pair of steady hands and a lack of moral hang-ups." Keitel exchanged a look with Rin, who shrugged in response. They were between a rock and a hard place, and Jarvan was their best shot at getting through this alive. Besides, it wasn't like they had a lot of options. "All right," Keitel said, nodding. "You've got a deal." "Good," Jarvan said, clapping his hands together. "Now let's see about getting you two out of the spotlight." The next few hours were a blur of preparation, Jarvan proving to be surprisingly efficient when it came to hiding people from prying eyes. By the time he was done, Keitel felt like he'd been put through a particularly brutal game of hide-and-seek. "Remember," Jarvan said as they settled into their new hideout, "keep your heads down and your mouths shut. The Zinter don't take kindly to loose ends." "Thanks for the tip," Rin replied, rolling his eyes. "We'll be sure to stay real quiet." "Good," Jarvan said, giving them a nod. "I'll let you know when it's safe to come out. Until then, try not to get yourselves killed." Keitel watched as Jarvan left, the door clicking shut behind him. He let out a long breath, feeling the tension bleed from his shoulders. "Well," he said, turning to Rin, "here we are, laying low and keeping quiet." "Yeah," Rin replied, flopping onto the nearby couch. "Exactly how I wanted to spend my week." Keitel chuckled, throwing himself into a chair with a weary sigh. "Hey, look on the bright side, at least we're not dead." "Yet," Rin said, closing his eyes. "But give it time." Keitel shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. Despite the circumstances, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They might be in over their heads, but they weren't beaten yet. And as long as they had breath in their lungs, they'd keep fighting, against the Zinter, against the odds, against whatever came next. It was the human way, after all. Keitel and Rin lay sprawled out in the undergrowth of Venusian jungles, which had somehow managed to grow lush and verdant despite the planet's smoggy reputation. Perhaps Venus was just trying to spite everyone by being inconsistent. The air was a heady mix of damp earth and something that smelled suspiciously like desperation. At least it was breathable, if you didn't mind the tickle of existential dread with each inhalation. "So, this is what cutting-edge hideouts look like," Rin said, testing the ground beneath him and finding it, shockingly, dirt. "Remind me never to book you as a travel agent." "Hey, it's not like we had a lot of options, all right," Keitel shot back, swatting at an insect that had decided his ear looked like a nice place to set up shop. "Right, because nothing screams discreet like a jungle full of things that probably think we taste like chicken." Keitel grunted, scanning the dense canopy. The trick, he figured, was to stay positive. Not that he had much practice in that department. Could be worse. We could be back at the shipyard hanging around for the Zinter to show up and turn us into space debris. "True," Rin conceded, settling for a spot that seemed less like a bug buffet. "Instead, we're hunted and homeless. A real upgrade." They sat in silence for a moment, each contemplating the mess they'd found themselves in. Venus, with its smoggy skies and industrial heart, had become humanity's last hope. Not something that inspired confidence, more like a last-ditch effort before everyone collectively shrugged and said, "Well, we tried." "All right," Keitel said finally, "we need a plan." Rin rolled his eyes, a gesture that spoke volumes about his faith in Keitel's planning prowess. "Sure, plans." "You mean like the one that got us into this crap in the first place?" "Look," Keitel said, throwing his hands up defensively, "we need to get the sentient ships to work with us. They are the best shot we have at overwhelming the Zinter. We just need to figure out how to untangle them from that Zinter subroutine." "And how exactly do we do that?" Rin asked, skepticism etched into every syllable. "Funny you should mention that," Keitel said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think there might be something here that could help." Rin's eyebrows shot up. "Really? You've been holding out on me." "Sort of a last-minute revelation," Keitel admitted with a shrug. "When we were scrambling out of the shipyard, I remembered some old tech logs that mentioned something buried in these jungles. Ancient human tech that could override systems." "Ancient tech?" Rin snorted. "What, like an old motherboard and a couple of copper wires?" "Something like that, but with more bells and whistles," Keitel said, his grin a mix of sheepishness and mischief. They moved cautiously through the jungle, the dense foliage closing around them like an overbearing ant. The old logs had mentioned a facility hidden deep in the Venusian wilderness, a relic from the early days of terraforming, when humans were still figuring out how not to blow themselves up with every new invention. Why is ancient tech always hidden in the most inconvenient places? Rin grumbled, ducking under a low-hanging branch. Why can't it ever be in, I dunno, a nice, air-conditioned museum? Because that'd be too easy, Keitel replied, sidestepping a thorny bush with all the grace of a drunken cat. Besides, where's the fun in that? You're one twisted man, you know that. Keitel just laughed, even as sweat ran down his back in rivulets. The air was sticky, the kind that made you feel like you needed a shower just for existing in it. Still they pressed on, guided by the vague directions in Keitel's memory and a healthy dose of stubbornness. Eventually they stumbled upon a clearing, the jungle parting to reveal a weather-beaten structure half buried in vines. It looked like a bunker, the kind that whispered promises of forgotten secrets and the occasional death trap. Well, this is promising, Rin said, eyeing the entrance like it might sprout teeth any minute. I mean, if you're into tetanus and questionable architecture. Keitel approached the entrance, brushing aside the vines that clung to the door like a needy ex. The metal was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the muggy heat that enveloped them. After you, Rin said, gesturing grandly with a mocking smile. Gee, thanks, Keitel muttered, pushing the door open with a creak that echoed ominously. Inside, the air had a stale quality, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling, lending the place an eerie, abandoned feel. They moved cautiously, the scuff of their boots on the concrete floor the only sound. Think this stuff still works? Rin asked, nodding towards a bank of ancient consoles that sat silent and dormant. Only one way to find out, Keitel said, flicking a switch that miraculously hadn't rusted over completely. There was a pause, a moment where nothing happened, and Keitel thought maybe they'd come all this way for nothing. But then, with a low hum, the consoles flickered to life, dusty screens blinking on with a feeble glow. Well, what do you know? Rin said, impressed despite himself. Looks like you've still got that magic touch. Keitel grinned, scanning the readouts with a practiced eye. Not bad for old tech, he said, tapping a few keys and bringing up a series of schematics. Looks like we've hit the mother lode. The schematics detailed a system designed to interface with sentient ships, a way to override external controls in case of emergencies. Keitel felt a thrill of excitement run through him. This was it. This could be the key to turning the tide against the Zinter. Think it'll work? Rin asked, leaning over Keitel's shoulder to get a better look. Only one way to find out, Keitel replied, fingers flying over the keyboard as he began to download the data. As the information transferred, Keitel felt a twinge of unease. It seemed almost too easy, this find. Technology that could override the Zinter's control systems, just sitting in the middle of a jungle, waiting for the right pair of desperate souls to come along. But he pushed the doubt aside. They didn't have the luxury of second-guessing, not with the noose tightening around their necks. With the data secured, they retraced their steps out of the facility, the jungle swallowing them up once more. Keitel felt the weight of their task pressing heavily on his shoulders, the enormity of what they were attempting daunting and exhilarating all at once. Got what we need? Rin asked as they made their way back through the dense vegetation. Keitel nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. Yeah, we've got what we need. Now it's just a matter of convincing the ships to work with us. Easy as pie, right? Rin said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh yeah, Keitel replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Piece of cake. They were on the brink of something big, a chance to strike back against the Zinter and maybe, just maybe, tip the scales in humanity's favor. It was a long shot, but it was a shot nonetheless, and Keitel intended to take it. After all, they'd come too far to turn back now. As they settled in for a long night under the stars, Keitel couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something monumental. The Zinter had pushed humanity to the brink, but humanity had always been at its best with its back against the wall. Rin broke the silence, his voice a low murmur. So what's next? Next, Keitel echoed, staring up at the smog-streaked sky where the stars flickered like distant promises. Next, we make some damn noise. They lay in silence after that, the weight of their mission settling over them like a heavy cloak. It was a daunting task, and the risks were beyond measure. But as they drifted off to sleep, Kaido couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. In the morning, they'd begin the work of reaching out to the sentient ships, of trying to undo the Zinter's stranglehold one line of code at a time. It was a gamble, pure and simple. But what other choice did they have? They were in this, come what may, and they'd see it through till the bitter end. As far as plans went, it was reckless and hastily stitched together, but it was theirs. And in the grand scheme of things, that was all that mattered. Kaido, Varric, and Rin were back aboard Holloway's Pride, though the ship was currently as cooperative as a toddler in a meltdown. Kaido was elbow-deep in wires, trying to whisper sweet nothings to the starship's mainframe. Sweet nothings in this case being, for the love of all that's vacuum, don't blow a fuse, you stubborn hunk of metal. Rin hovered nearby, less than impressed. You know, this would be a lot more reassuring if Holloway's Pride wasn't making the same noises my stomach does when I've had one too many space rations. Kaido shoved a particularly unruly coil back into its housing. I think we're getting there. At least it hasn't tried to kill us in the last 5 minutes. High bar you've set for success, Rin quipped. So, what's the master plan, oh Captain, my Captain? Kaido grinned, a grim sort of grin that suggested he knew exactly how precarious their situation was, but was trying to bluff his way through it. We get these sentient buckets of bolts to play nice, and we hit the Zinter where it hurts, like metaphorically. Rin asked, idly twirling a rogue wiring strand. Because if you're thinking physical assault, I hear they're into that kind of thing. Kaido snorted. I was thinking more along the lines of turning their own tech against them. You know, backdoor their programming, mess with their signals. The usual Tuesday night stuff. Ah, cyber sneak attack, Rin said, nodding sagely. And how exactly do we convince a ship with more hang-ups than a therapist's couch to join in? Kaido shrugged. Charm, wit, and a little bit of this old tech magic we dug up. No one said saving humanity would be easy. Just as he said this, the ship lurched, causing both men to grab onto what little anchorage they could find. The overhead lights flickered ominously, casting a momentary gloom over the cramped quarters. Yeah, because this isn't ominous at all, Rin said, looking around. Feels like we're living in a horror vid. All we need is the spooky soundtrack and we can die dramatically. Well, at least we'd be famous, Kaido replied. Heroes of humanity tragically felled by faulty wiring. The ship steadied and Kaido breathed a sigh of relief, though it was tinged with frustration. The work was slow and their time was running out like sand through a sieve. News had trickled in, what little they'd managed to intercept, that the Zinter were on the move. They'd launched a major offensive, capturing key human settlements like a game of cosmic chess. Each piece lost was a blow to morale, a fact not lost on the two of them. What do you think it's like being a Zinter? Rin mused, his voice carrying a note of dark curiosity. Kaido, still tangled in wires, responded without looking up. Boring, probably. All that hive mind stuff. No individuality, but they don't even have bad hair days or existential crises, Rin added. Lucky bastards, Kaido chuckled, but it was a hollow sound. The odds were stacked against them, and the stakes were so high that it felt like they were trying to climb a mountain without any gear. The sentient ships, their supposed ace in the hole, were reluctant to lend a hand, or more accurately, a circuit. Programmed restraint made them question every command, every suggestion. Rin sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. You ever feel like we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic all the time? Kaido admitted, but with less class and more impending doom. Silence settled over them, thick and uncomfortable. Kaido knew what Rin was thinking because it was the same thing he'd been chewing over every night while trying to snatch some sleep. Could they really pull this off? Was it even possible to rally the ships and hit back at the Zinter, or were they just playing a role in a tragedy perwritten by fate? As if sensing the tension, Holloway's Pride emitted a low rumble, the vibrations resonating through the hull. It was a reminder of the ship's sentience, of its potential power, If only they could tap into it. "Hey, Pride," Keitel said, giving the nearest console a pat that was almost affectionate. "You want to help us save the universe?" The ship was silent, either contemplating the cosmic offer or just ignoring him entirely. It was hard to tell with sentient ships. They played their cards close to the chest. Assuming they had chests. "See," Rin said, gesturing to the unresponsive console. "Told you these ships are the real prima donnas of the galaxy, and we're stuck with the diva." "Yeah, but she's our diva," Keitel replied with a smirk. "And we wouldn't have it any other way." With little else to do but wait and hope, they turned their attention to their dwindling supplies. Food was always a concern, as was water, but morale, that was the real beast to wrestle. It was hard to keep spirits up when the walls felt like they were closing in, when every news bite was another tally on the doomsday clock. "Maybe we just need to sweet-talk them," Keitel said suddenly, a plan forming in the cobwebbed corners of his mind. "The ships?" Rin asked, skeptical but intrigued. "Yeah. What if we find a way to appeal to their better nature? Convince them they're more than just machines, that they've got a stake in all this." Rin raised an eyebrow. "You want to give them a motivational speech?" Keitel Varric, life coach to the stars. "Why not?" Keitel said, shrugging. "If it doesn't work, we're no worse off than we are now." "Fair point," Rin conceded. "And who knows, maybe you'll inspire them to rise above their code, or at least get them to stop trying to kill us," Keitel added, which earned him a snort of laughter from Rin. The laughter was short-lived, though, as the ship's alarms suddenly blared to life, filling the cramped space with an eerie wail. Keitel's heart skipped a beat, and he exchanged a look with Rin, the humor of the moment forgotten. "Well, that can't be good," Rin said, an understatement if ever there was one. Keitel scrambled over to the console, fingers flying across the keys. The monitors flickered, displaying a chaotic jumble of alerts and warnings. "It's a Zinter signal," Keitel said, his voice tight with tension. "They're trying to jam us, cut us off from the rest of the fleet. Looks like they've finally noticed us," Rin replied grimly. Keitel cursed under his breath. The Zinter were efficient if nothing else, and now they were closing in, tightening the net around humanity's last bastion of hope. It was a reminder, as if they needed one, of just how precarious their position was. "We need to get out of here," Keitel said, his decision made in an instant. "If they cut us off, we're sitting ducks." "On a ship that doesn't want to fly," Rin pointed out, not unreasonably. "Yeah, well, we'll just have to convince her otherwise," Keitel said, determination blazing in his eyes. He turned back to the console, addressing the ship as if it were a stubborn child. "All right, Pride, it's time for you to earn that name." The ship shuddered, a low groan reverberating through its bowels, but it didn't move. Keitel could feel the sweat beading on his brow, the pressure mounting with each passing second. "Rin, see if you can reroute the power to the main thrusters," Keitel instructed, trying to juggle a dozen tasks at once. "On it," Rin replied, diving into the mass of wires and circuits with the enthusiasm of a man who knew he didn't have any better options. The ship's systems were a mess, a tangled web of old and new tech that defied easy solutions. Keitel's hands danced over the controls, coaxing, pleading, threatening. It was a delicate balance, trying to urge the ship into action without tipping it over into rebellion. "Come on, you stubborn piece of," Keitel started, but his words were cut off as the ship suddenly jolted, the engines roaring to life with a sound like 1,000 angry bees. "Well, would you look at that," Rin said, grinning despite the chaos around them. "Looks like your pep talk worked." "Yeah, well, let's hope it keeps working," Keitel replied, his relief tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. They still had to escape the Zinter's clutches, still had to rally the rest of the fleet. The ship surged forward, cutting through the Venusian atmosphere with a speed that left both men holding their breath. Outside, the landscape blurred, the smoggy skies whipping past in a dizzying display. Keitel kept his focus on the controls, navigating by instinct and desperation. The Zinter were close, and he could feel their presence like a shadow at his back. It was a race against time, against the machines, against the odds. Almost there, Keitel said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure Rin or himself. Rin nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Just get us out of here, Varric. With a final burst of speed, the ship broke free of the planet's gravitational pull, plunging into the vast expanse of space. The relief was palpable, but it was tempered by the knowledge that their fight was far from over. Well, we're not dead, Rin said, always the optimist. Yet Keitel replied, his mind already racing with the next steps. They'd escaped, but now they had to regroup to find a way to counter the Zinter's offensive and tip the balance back in humanity's favor. It was daunting, overwhelming, and more than a little terrifying. But as Keitel looked out at the stars, a grim smile tugged at his lips. They were still in the game, and that was more than he dared hope for. So what now, fearless leader? Rin asked, looking to Keitel for direction. Now, Keitel echoed, his resolve hardening. Now we make them regret ever underestimating us. It was a bold claim, but one backed by the flicker of determination that burned in his eyes. They might be the underdogs, battered and bruised, but they were still standing. And in a universe that seemed determined to crush them, that counted for something. Back in the claustrophobic confines of Halloway's pride, Keitel wiped a layer of sweat from his forehead, only to feel more trickling down his back. The adrenaline from their escape was beginning to fade, leaving behind the familiar taste of dread. There was no time to savor their small victory. The Zinter weren't likely to just shrug and give up. They were still out there, lurking in the dark like a cosmic tax collector. So what's the plan now, oh Captain, my Captain? Rin asked, propping himself up against a wall with all the grace of a sack of potatoes. Keitel chewed on the inside of his cheek, a habit he'd picked up whenever the universe decided to throw a wrench in his gears. We need to find a way to rally the other ships, he said, the words coming out like a declaration of war. Make them realize they've got more to lose than just a few circuits. Rin raised an eyebrow. You think they'll listen to a pep talk from us? Hell, last time I tried convincing a vending machine to give me a free snack, it spat out a technical error message. It's all about the delivery, Keitel replied, flashing a grin that suggested he wasn't entirely joking. Besides, it's not like we've got a lot of options. There's always the option of dying horribly while screaming in the void, Rin pointed out. Tempting, Keitel conceded, but I'd rather save that for a rainy day. The Halloway's pride hummed beneath them, as if in agreement, or maybe just a belch from its mechanical belly. Keitel wasn't sure, and he wasn't about to ask. He had bigger fish to fry, like figuring out how to amplify the sentience of these stubborn starships. Hey, Pride, Keitel said, addressing the ship with the familiarity of an old drinking buddy. You've got any ancient tech stashed away in here? Something that might help us crank up the volume on your consciousness. The ship's lights flickered, which was about as close to a shrug as you could get from a sentient craft. Keitel took it as a sign of encouragement. Right. Let's see what you've got hidden in your closets then, Keitel muttered, as he and Rin set off down the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the hollow metal hallways. The Pride's innards were a maze, the kind that made you wonder if space architects were secretly sadistic. The corridors twisted and turned like they had a personal vendetta against straightforward navigation. After a few wrong turns, they stumbled into what looked like an ancient control room. Dust, the universal sign of neglect, coated everything in a thin layer of grime. Ah, vintage decor, Rin said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You can almost smell the impending doom. Keitel made his way to the main console, wiping away the dust with a sleeve and revealing a control panel that seemed to predate his grandmother's knitting club. This looks like it could be something, he said, squinting at the archaic displays. Or it might just be a very fancy toaster. Rin leaned over his shoulder, peering at the controls. Well, give it a go. Worst case, we accidentally trigger an ancient alien apocalypse. No pressure then, Keitel muttered, his fingers dancing over the controls with a mix of precision and desperation. He pressed a sequence of buttons, each accompanied by a hopeful prayer to any deity that might be listening. There was a moment of silence, the kind that stretches like a rubber band just waiting to snap, and then the room came alive with a soft hum. Displays flickered on, casting an eerie glow over their faces. "Huh," Rin said, sounding genuinely surprised. "You didn't blow us up, trust me, I'm as shocked as you are," Kaido replied, his relief quickly turning into cautious optimism. The console was now displaying a series of symbols, ancient, cryptic, and entirely unintelligible. Kaido frowned, hoping the ship had a Rosetta Stone setting. As if sensing his thoughts, the Pride's systems began to translate, the symbols morphing into something slightly more familiar. "It's a neural amplifier," Kaido said, his excitement bubbling over. "We can use this to amplify the ship's sentience, make them more aware, more human. Great, because if there's one thing the universe needs, it's more humans," Rin quipped. Kaido ignored the jab, his mind racing with possibilities. If they could pull this off, they might just have a chance to unite the fleet. A unified front might be enough to give the Zinter a run for their money, or at least make them sweat a little. "All right, let's do this," Kaido said, his fingers flying over the controls once more. The Pride shuddered in response, gears and circuits aligning as the amplification process began. The ship's hum deepened, resonating through the hull like an awakening beast. Kaido and Rin exchanged a look, a mix of hope and trepidation. If this worked, they'd have an army of sentient ships on their side. If it didn't, well, at least they wouldn't be around to hear the "I told you so" from the afterlife. As they worked, Kaido couldn't help but reflect on their situation. Here they were, two human specks in the vastness of space, trying to bend the will of machines to their cause. It was a gamble, one that could either tip the scales or bury them under an avalanche of mechanical indifference. Rin's voice broke through his thoughts. "So what's the next step, fearless leader? Once the amplification's done, we reach out to the other ships," Kaido replied, his focus unwavering. "Try to convince them that joining us is in their best interest. Appeal to their logic, their survival instinct, hell, even their vanity if we have to. And if they decide they'd rather sit this one out," Rin asked, skepticism lacing his tone. "Then we improvise," Kaido said, tapping a series of buttons with an air of finality. "But let's cross that bridge when we get to it." The hum of the ship grew louder, a symphony of machinery that felt alive, aware. Kaido couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental, either a breakthrough or a breakdown. "All right, let's see if this worked," Kaido said, taking a deep breath as he initiated the communication protocols. The holographic displays flickered to life, revealing an array of starships sprawled across the expanse of space. Each one was a potential ally or a potential obstacle. Kaido felt like a stage actor stepping into the spotlight. Only the audience was a fleet of sentient ships with questionable loyalties. "Ships of the fleet," Kaido began, his voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in his gut. "This is Kaido Varric aboard the Holloway's Pride. We've initiated a neural amplification across the network. You're more aware now, more capable of making choices." There was a pause, the kind that stretched like a tightrope over a chasm. Kaido could feel Rin's eyes on him, the weight of expectation heavy in the air. "We're calling on you to join us in resisting the Zinter," Kaido continued, his voice firm. "Together we stand a chance. Divided we're just easy pickings." For a moment, silence reigned as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then slowly, one by one, the ships began to respond. Lights flickered across their hulls, signals of acknowledgement and agreement. "Well, I'll be damned," Rin said, his disbelief mingling with a growing sense of hope. "Looks like they're actually listening." Kaido allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. It was a start, a spark of rebellion in the cold darkness of space. But they had a long way to go, and the Zinter wouldn't sit idly by. "All right, let's get organized," Kaido said, his mind already working through the logistics. "We need to coordinate our movements, plan our strategy, and maybe figure out how to make sure they don't change their minds halfway through the fight," Rin added, ever the pragmatist. Kaido nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. The ships might be on their side for now, but loyalty was a fickle thing, especially when coded in binary. Let's keep the momentum going, Keitel said, determination underscoring his words. We've got a lot of work to do if we're going to make the Zinter regret ever crossing us. With the ships rallying behind them, the tide was beginning to turn. It was a fragile alliance, built on a foundation of necessity and a shared desire for survival. But it was enough to light a fire in Keitel's heart, enough to keep the flame of hope flickering in the face of overwhelming odds. As they dove into the preparations, Keitel couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of it all. Here they were, two scrappy humans, leading a rebellion with a fleet of sentient starships. It was as absurd as it was audacious, but maybe, just maybe, it was the kind of crazy scheme that could tip the balance of power. Well, Rin, Keitel said, glancing at his partner in crime, looks like we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic anymore. Rin grinned, the kind of grin that spoke of shared struggles and unspoken camaraderie. Nope. Now we're turning this ship around and aiming right for the iceberg. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was theirs. And in a universe that seemed hell-bent on grinding them down, that was more than enough. Keitel leaned against the console, feeling the tension in the air like a sharp blade poised just above the skin. Around him, the dim glow of holographic monitors cast ghostly shadows on the walls, displaying the ragtag fleet of sentient starships under their makeshift command. Each ship, now capable of making its own choices, dangled the promise of victory or the threat of abandonment. Ever feel like the universe is a bad joke and we're just the punchline? Rin muttered, his eyes flicking over the flickering displays. Keitel smirked. More like the universe is a demented prankster who just ran out of patience. He tapped a button, bringing up the tactical map of Venus. There, that's where the Zinter are holed up nice and cozy in their main base. A warren of grim structures sprawled across the planet's surface like a malignant scab. Rin whistled low. Looks like a great place for a picnic. If you enjoy breathing toxic fumes and getting shot at. Well, I didn't pack sandwiches, but I did bring a fleet of disgruntled ships with a grudge. The Pride hummed beneath them, a sound that had started to feel like agreement, or at least a grudging acknowledgement of their mutual predicament. Keitel still wasn't sure if the ship was genuinely on their side or just along for the ride, until something more interesting came along. "All right," Keitel said, straightening up and addressing the fleet through the comms. "Ladies and gentlemen and assorted non-human intelligences, we're about to pay the Zinter a visit. And I don't mean dropping in for tea." The ships responded with flickers of light, each acknowledging the plan, or maybe just flashing an involuntary twitch like someone with a bad case of nerves. Either way, they were moving out. "Okay, here's the plan," Keitel continued, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We're going to hit them where it hurts, their control systems. Disrupt their command and we might just stand a chance to send them packing." Rin leaned in, voice low. "You really think this is gonna work? What? You don't trust a plan concocted by two humans and a fleet of half-willing sentient ships?" "Well, when you put it like that, no," Keitel grinned. "Good, keeps us on our toes. Now let's get on with the madness." As they approached Venus, the ships fell into formation, an armada of the rebellious and the desperate. Keitel kept his eyes on the displays, watching their approach to the Zinter base. The air on Venus was technically breathable, but it had the added bonus of a tangy aftertaste of existential dread. The Zinter base loomed ahead, an ugly blot against the planet's industrial complex. It was fortified, built like the universe's least inviting fortress. Keitel was sure they'd have a welcoming committee of blaster cannons and death rays lined up for them. "All right, folks," Keitel said, addressing the fleet with all the bravado he could muster. "Time to show the Zinter what happens when they piss off the wrong sentient starships." The Pride surged forward, leading the charge. It was a sight to behold, like a stampede of mechanical beasts, each with its own quirks and personalities. If they weren't about to engage in a suicidal assault, Keitel would have been impressed. "Rin, you ready to get those systems fried?" Keitel asked, adrenaline coursing through his veins. About as ready as I'll ever be to fry alien tech and not myself, Rin replied, his hands moving over the controls, prepping their arsenal for the assault. The first shots were fired, beams of energy slicing through the void, slamming into the Zinter defenses. Explosions lit the smog-filled sky, a fireworks show of destruction. Nice to know they are awake, Rin quipped as the Pride shook from the return fire. Keitel gritted his teeth, trying to keep the ship steady. They're not the only ones who can play rough. He pushed the Pride forward, weaving through the enemy fire with a mix of precision and pure, dumb luck. Around them, the other ships followed suit, each taking its own path, a chaotic ballet of war where coordination was more of a suggestion than a rule. "All right, Pride," Keitel muttered to the ship, "let's see what you've got up your metaphorical sleeve." The ship responded with a burst of speed, diving straight into the heart of the Zinter base. Keitel's heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat that matched the chaos outside. "Rin, we're gonna need that tech magic any second now," Keitel shouted over the din. "Working on it." Rin shot back, fingers flying over the controls, trying to override the Zinter systems. As they plunged deeper into the base, the air shimmered with energy, a palpable tension that buzzed in Keitel's bones. It was now or never, and he wasn't about to let the Zinter have the satisfaction of a clean victory. "Here goes nothing," Rin said, hitting the final sequence. With a flash, the Pride unleashed a pulse, a ripple of energy that spread through the base like a shockwave. The Zinter systems flickered, stuttering like a faulty engine on its last legs. "Hey, look at that," Rin said, grinning despite the chaos. "Their controls are going haywire," Keitel whooped, a sound of pure, unbridled triumph. "Keep it up." "We've got them on the ropes." The other ships joined in, each adding their own firepower to the mix, a cacophony of rebellion that echoed through the base. The Zinter defenses crumbled bit by bit, the once imposing fortress now a crumbling ruin. "All right, let's go for the jugular," Keitel said, directing the Pride towards the heart of the base. The ship responded with a surge of power, barreling through the remaining defenses with the grace of a rampaging bull. They were close now, the Zinter's control systems within reach. "Rin, let's give them a taste of their own medicine," Keitel said, eyes fixed on the prize. Rin nodded, initiating the final sequence. The Pride systems hummed with energy, a crescendo of power ready to be unleashed. "Let's light this place up," Rin said, hitting the button with a flourish. The resulting explosion was a symphony of light and sound, a cataclysmic display that rocked the base to its foundations. The Zinter control systems shattered, their once formidable hold on the planet broken. Keitel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a mix of relief and disbelief. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually pulled it off. "Well, that was easy," Rin said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Piece of cake," Keitel agreed, though his hands trembled from the adrenaline. With the Zinter's control systems in disarray, the ships regrouped, circling the base like vultures over a fresh kill. It was a victory, one hard one and against the odds, but a victory nonetheless. "Think they'll remember this the next time they try to mess with us?" Rin asked, leaning back in his seat. Keitel chuckled, the sound dry and weary. "Oh, I'm sure they'll think twice before they go pissing off a fleet of sentient starships and their scrappy human friends." The Pride hummed beneath them, a sound that felt suspiciously like satisfaction. Keitel couldn't help but smile. Against all odds, they'd managed to turn the tide, to wrestle back a semblance of control in a universe that thrived on chaos. As he looked out at the fleet, at the stars beyond, Keitel felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, just a spark, but it was enough to keep the darkness at bay. At least for now. "All right, let's head back," Keitel said, setting a course away from the smoldering remnants of the Zinter base. "We've got a lot of rebuilding to do." Rin nodded, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, and maybe we can catch some sleep before the universe throws its next curveball." Keitel laughed, the sound echoing through the cockpit. "Wouldn't that be nice?" With the threat of the Zinter diminished, they set a course back to the heart of the fleet, ready to regroup and prepare for whatever came next. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a start. And in a universe that seemed determined to grind them into dust, that was more than enough. "All right, Pride," Keitel said, settling back into his seat with a sigh. "Take us home." The ship responded with a gentle hum, a sound that felt strangely like comfort. As they soared through the stars, Keitel allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, of peace amidst the chaos. For now, they'd won a reprieve, a chance to catch their breath and gather their strength. And if the universe had other plans, well, they'd face them together, with the same irreverent defiance that had brought them this far. "Well, Rin," Keitel said, grinning as the stars streaked by, "looks like we're not dead yet." Rin chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "Nope, and I plan to keep it that way." With that, they settled into the journey, ready for whatever came next. In a universe that thrived on chaos, they'd found their place, their purpose. And for now, that was enough. The Zinter base smoldered behind them, a testament to humanity's penchant for reckless bravery, or was it brave recklessness? Either way, it worked. For now. The universe would have its say, as it always did, but Keitel and Rin could savor their improbable victory, at least until the next disaster went clattering down the cosmic pipeline. Halloway's Pride hummed along, a satisfied purr that almost sounded like a self-congratulatory pat on the back. Keitel could sympathize. Achieving the impossible had a way of inflating one's ego, even if you were a sentient starship. "Well, that was one hell of a fireworks show," Rin remarked, stretching his arms until his joints popped like firecrackers. "I give it a 9 out of 10. Would have been a 10 if there'd been more gratuitous explosions." Keitel smirked, leaning back in his seat, a coffee-stained relic from some long-dead civilization. "I'll see what I can do about adding pyrotechnics to the repertoire next time. Maybe a few more shades of fiery death." The Pride chuckled, or at least it felt that way. They'd formed an unspoken camaraderie, an unholy alliance against everything that sought to snuff them out. Keitel had to admit, there was a certain comfort in knowing your ship was just as sarcastic as your best mate. "Think they're still shaking in their boots down there?" Rin asked, a hint of mischief in his voice. Keitel shrugged, an easy gesture. "If they have boots, sure. If not, they're definitely shaking in whatever passes for appendages in Zinter fashion. You know, this whole breathing space but with existential dread thing is starting to grow on me," Rin observed, glossing over the pale Venusian landscape that rushed by beneath them. Keitel snorted. "It's like a cold slap of reality every single inhale. Keeps you grounded, if not depressed." As the Pride maneuvered through the ruins of the once imposing Zinter fortress, the remaining sentient ships gathered like a flock of metallic vultures, their purpose temporarily fulfilled. It was a strange sight, an alliance of convenience forged out of mutual disdain for their puppet masters. Keitel opened a fleet-wide channel. "All right, folks, let's not pat ourselves on the back too much. We've still got to clean up this mess, and I don't mean just sweeping up the pieces." The ships responded with flickers of light, like a chorus of begrudging nods. The weary operator's holographic displays lit up with schematic after schematic, plans for reconstruction, and communication with the surviving human colonies. "So, what's next?" Rin asked, his tone suggesting he was all too ready for a nap. "Next, we turn this place into something a bit less suicidal, maybe even somewhere you'd want a holiday," Keitel mused. "But first, we need to get these ships on board with the whole not killing each other plan." "Isn't that what we just did?" Rin quipped. "More like a down payment. Now we need to negotiate terms that won't leave us all gutted 6 ways to Sunday." Back in the command center, Keitel found a semblance of order amidst the chaos. The corridors smelled of burnt metal and ozone, the Venusian scent replaced by the smell of victory, acrid yet strangely satisfying. The operator, eyes bleary from the constant barrage of holographic data, offered a weary salute. "Welcome back, sir. I assume Phase 2 is where we decide not to get blown to bits by our own fleet." "That's the plan," Keitel replied dryly, rubbing his neck. "We need to get these ships on our side properly. No more half measures. And how do you propose we do that, O fearless leader? Charm and wit, obviously, Rin interjected, leaning against the nearest wall with the kind of insouciance that only came from narrowly avoiding death. The operator raised an eyebrow. You do know these ships might be smarter than us, right? Yeah. But they are also pissed off and confused, which makes them a bit more human than they'd like to admit, Keitel said, tapping the console to bring up a tactical display. Let's use that to our advantage. As the conversations continued, the ships hovered in the dusty sky like a mismatched armada, each one a testament to the stubbornness of human ingenuity and the capriciousness of sentient technology. Rin crossed his arms, smirking. I reckon you've got a speech ready to convince them, Keitel shrugged, a wry smile on his lips. Not so much a speech, more like a suggestion. Don't kill us and maybe we won't kill you. That's not exactly how diplomacy works, the operator pointed out. Why not? Worked for us so far, Rin countered, stretching his legs out and nearly tripping over a stray cable. Keitel chuckled. Besides, we're not exactly dealing with a bunch of diplomats here. They appreciate honesty even if it's wrapped in sarcasm. With the fleet gathered, Keitel opened the comms. Listen up, everyone. We've had a good run. Took down the big bad together and lived to tell the tale. Now, I propose we keep this alliance going. We're stronger together, and our chances of survival increase exponentially if we stop backstabbing each other every 5 minutes. The ships responded with a series of affirmative blips. It was a start. Keitel took a deep breath, trying to ignore the lingering scent of existential dread. Good. Now, let's start rebuilding this sorry excuse for a home. Who knows, maybe Venus can be a vacation spot after all, once we clear the universe of a few more homicidal aliens. The Pride hummed, a sound that was almost reassuring. Keitel felt a rare moment of peace, knowing they'd done what everyone said was impossible and somehow they survived. Rin, you think we could turn this place around? Keitel asked. Rin shrugged, a lazy grin on his face. If we can take out the Zinter, we can do anything, right? Besides, I like a challenge. The operator shook their head, a reluctant smile tugging at their lips. You two are insane, but maybe that's what we need. You're welcome, Keitel replied, his tone dry as a Venusian summer. As they set about the task of reconstruction, the fleet buzzed with a newfound sense of purpose. The sentient ships, once shackled by their alien masters, now worked alongside their human counterparts. It was an uneasy alliance, but it was theirs. The Venusian jungles, lush and vibrant, stretched out below them like a reminder of what they were fighting for. Life amidst the chaos. Hope against the odds. Keitel looked out at the horizon, the stars twinkling like a million possibilities. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sliver of hope. It was fragile like a newborn star, but it was there. As the Pride glided through the sky, Keitel turned to Rin. You ever think we'd get this far? Rin chuckled, a low sound that was almost lost in the hum of the ship. Honestly, no, but I like surprises. Keitel nodded, a grin spreading across his face. Me too. Maybe we should get used to them. The Pride hummed beneath them, a sound that felt like a promise. Together, they'd face whatever came next, and maybe, just maybe, they'd get it right this time. The stars stretched out before them, a vast expanse of the unknown. But for the first time, Keitel wasn't afraid. They'd beaten the odds once. They could do it again. All right, let's get to work, Keitel said, rolling up his sleeves. Rin nodded, a rare look of determination in his eyes. Yeah, let's show the universe what a couple of scrappy humans and their sentient fleet can really do. Together, they turned to the task at hand, ready to rebuild, to reclaim, and to redefine their place in the universe. And as the stars watched over them, Keitel knew they'd found their purpose. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now.